You designed the air campaign for Desert Storm, arguably the most consequential military plan of the last 40 years. When you are given a mission with enormous stakes and genuine uncertainty, where do you actually start?
Well, first of all, it's a wonderful question, and it's a very complex one because, yeah, I ended up being the individual who wrote the actual attack plans for each and every day of the campaign, the air campaign. But, I was working for a whole series of individuals. Ultimately, my boss was Lieutenant General Chuck Horner, who was the first Joint and Combined Force Air Component Commander, who was working directly for General Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
So first one has to put into context, what it is you're being asked to do. Now, in this particular case, it was quite unusual in that I was thrust into a situation that a couple of weeks prior, I had absolutely no idea that I would be put in that situation. When Saddam invaded Kuwait, I happened to be on holiday in the Caribbean. I made it back to the Pentagon as rapidly as possible. And just for context, I was in the policy or staff group working for the Secretary of the Air Force, Don Rice, at that time.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm gonna apologize up front for the length of my answer because I'm trying to give you a bit of context and background.
Yep.
So that my answer seems a little bit more, makes a little bit more sense. But prior to working for the Secretary of the Air Force, I worked for a gentleman whose name was Colonel John Warden. And he was the leader of a deputy who was responsible for warfighting concepts development. And John was a very innovative thinker, and we both tended to think in the context of how can one optimize the application of air power and the accomplishment of national security objectives. So when this thing kicked off, we actually got together and it talked about, well, what could be the optimal use of air power in this particular situation? I'm talking the very early days. How do we stop Saddam from moving further south into Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened over the next 2 weeks is pretty spectacular. There've been a couple books written about it. There's one that pops into mind. It's called Heart of the Storm. It's written about that 2-week period. It reads like a novel, but all of it's true. It was written by a gentleman known as his name's Rich Reynolds. You can get it online, and it's fascinating read. So I'm going to skip some of the background, and I'm going to basically tell you, I now end up 2 weeks later in Saudi Arabia because General Schwarzkopf asked Colonel Warden and myself, a couple others, to go over and brief General Horner on our initial ideas on how to optimize the use of air power to halt Saddam's invasion and to basically put together an air campaign option that could fit into General Schwarzkopf's overarching strategic plan. So that's how I end up in Saudi Arabia. 1 week I'm in the Pentagon working for the Secretary of the Air Force and his policy group. The next week I'm sitting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, thinking about how to optimize the use of air power to provide General Horner options, because he had a very good defensive plan, but his folks hadn't thought about offense at all. So how do you tackle this? Well, the way we tackled it is by looking at Iraq as a system, not just defaulting to the traditional use of military force, which, quite frankly, that's been the purview of land forces for 10,000 years. And their solutions obviously attack right up the center. Well, maybe that's not the smartest way to do business. Maybe what you want to do is capitalize on the coalition's strengths in the context of what air power could do to get to Iraq and Saddam Hussein's critical centers of gravity and paralyze his ability to continue with his military designs. And that's exactly what we put together. And what drove the campaign development was this notion of not absolute destruction of a list of targets, but looking at what the desired end state would be and then working backwards in the context of what effects can we accomplish that would cause Saddam Hussein to be unable to execute or to continue his aggressive actions. And then ultimately, what would it take to get him to remove himself from Kuwait? So that's a bit of a long answer. In reality, it's a quite short answer. But the essence of what we did is we looked at Iraq as a state. We identified, or as a system, we identified the critical centers of gravity at the strategic level that we wanted to act upon and achieve particular outcomes in each one. And then we decomposed that into operational level centers of gravity, which became the target sets. And then decompose those further into tactical levels of centers of gravity, which were in fact became the individual targets. So every particular target that we identified had a tie up to an operational and a strategic objective. So thinking about a problem, this one happens to be Desert Storm because you brought it up. But the broader application is, how do you take any problem and start with identifying what it is you want to accomplish as a starting point, and then working backwards to figure out just how is the best optimal way to accomplish your desired outcomes or effects?